Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt, and you have reached Venus Unplugged. And what we do at this blog talk is explore the archetype of Venus within and without through art and poetry and myth and dream. And what we've been exploring for the last couple of weeks is the myth of Persephone and her abductee, HADES, and her mother, Demeter. So these three are involved in this epic tale of love and abduction and opposite worlds. So we've been looking at HADES. All right, now, once again, HADES is not death and is not the devil. HADES is the god of the underworld, and he actually protects the dead, protects whatever in the underworld. He's the one that, if we don't honor those who have died, if we don't give them a proper burial, we're pissing HADES off. He's going to come into our life in some way. So these rituals, these ancient unseen. So HADES, within ourselves, we have all of these archetypes. We're actually in them, and they are in us. And some people are more prone to one than another. Now, with the HADES, if that's a strong archetype in your life or in the life of your lover, it's very often an introverted. Their richness, they understand that for them, the true riches come from the inner world. Unlike Zeus, who says, let's just, buy it and do it and get it and create it and make money on it. HADES will make money on things, but it will be through an introverted way. So when we explore this archetype within, or now sometimes we get mugged. Suddenly something is in our life or a situation is in our life, and we are at odds and dumbfounded, like, what the heck is this? Very often that will be a situation or an archetype that is in our inferior function. And, our inferior function is kind of our blind spot, where we don't know what to do, okay? It's just like we're at a loss. So it doesn't mean it's inferior, that it's less than. It's just we don't know that much about it. It's not the place, an extrovert is not going to go into the dark places of HADES to understand the nature of poetry. It's not going to happen. So if suddenly the lights go out and they need to be quiet for a while, or they need to get information from the depths of their being, that is not something they're comfortable with. That's more of a Zeus, okay, the hero out there, all right? But without HADES, we can't draw from the wealth, and all wealth does come from the earth, the inner earth. It's all in there. So, or at least what man calls wealthy. I mean, there are other places, but that's the richness. So HADES is that richness. Now, when I was looking at this, I thought, wait a second. Demeter, the mother, who's also HADES' sister, she is the goddess of growth and fertility and makes all things grow. But without HADES in the underworld, who has the secrets of how things grow, it's not going to grow. So they need to work together. They're not separate. This mystery of what we don't know, or even in the world of growing things in the earth. Yes, we know its process, but we actually don't know what that magic is that makes something grow. That's HADES. That's the growing principle. That's the activated principle. So that which you cannot see. And if we're extroverted, we definitely don't like things that we can't see. because we want to see them, we want to use them, we want to be part of them, and Hades doesn't give that up so easily within it and without. All right? So he's the king of the underworld, and he's the god of death and the dead, but he's not death. He's the god of the death and the dead, but he's not death. He doesn't bring death. He tends to. And the death could be the death of an idea. It doesn't have to be a person. Or it could be death of a gift, a cherished gift that you buried because no one saw it, or people saw it and it scared you, or whatever the reasons that we bury our stuff. Or we keep it a secret because it's weird, and I don't know, other people don't do this, so I'm not going to say anything. That's typical, Hades behavior. Or we hide it, kind of hide our light under a bushel, as they say. We hide these gifts and talents, or this knowing, or this love of the unknown and the mysterious, which can be a little scary in a good way. That's always the Hades material. That's when that archetype is floating around. So he also defends the right of the dead to do burial. It's very important. Hades is also the god of the hidden wells and the fertile soil, and he nourishes the seed grain. And, of course, there's always gold and silver and other fabulous metals, so there's that connection to that element, and what makes that dynamic, oil. Yeah, there's oil too, right? So the riches of the underworld, and also that is symbolic, the riches of the underworld within ourselves. Well, gifts we don't know that we have, or gifts that are strange, and we feel hard-pressed, or sometimes we don't know how to get to them. So in this story, in this mythos of Persephone, Hades decides he wants to have a relationship, because a Hades man without a loving relationship can just become a total recluse, and in a sense not get much done. He'll get a lot done for his own inner world, but it doesn't really pan out in the outer world. He needs to develop a connection to Hermes, and Hermes is the messenger of the god. And Hermes we know Hermes is present when it's suddenly that bam, that insight, or that humor. Something happens where which is very annoying. Geminis can be so annoying because it's just pop up with this Hermes. Just nobody's even, where'd you come up with that? This insight or this intuition. So Hades, and if you have a strong Hades within, or that's your kind of the archetype you live by, or is your nature, it needs to connect to Hermes so that you can communicate it. Yeah, it's cool to go off into the depths and the dungeons and the underworld, but if you can't bring it back in some way, you can just lose yourself in the underworld. And so it's important to have connection. So in this case, in the mythological case, Hades decided to go to his brother. The three brothers are Zeus and Hades. Zeus is the heavens, Hades is the underworld, and Poseidon is the sea. These are three aspects of creation. So he goes to the upper world. Now he's only, the ancient Greeks were really not interested in finding out that much about Hades because they were so afraid. It was like, just leave him alone. We won't call on him, and hopefully he won't call on us, all right? But so it's rare that Hades comes into the upper world, So one of his superpowers is the cap of invisibility. So Hades can be present in our life and we don't see it. Or when he goes to the upper world to have discussion with his brother, actually his younger brother, Hades the firstborn, he wears his cap of invisibility. No one can see him. You can't see it. It's kind of interesting in terms of the Hermes, messenger of the god. Now, Hermes is the only god that can go to heaven, earth, and hell, sometimes all at the same time. It's got the kind of universal passport to, talk about a life without borders. Now, in our personal life, when we have too much Hermes and we don't have boundaries, we're annoying or invasive, or we can't really communicate the wisdom that is Hermes because it's just all over the place. So Hades goes and brokers a deal with his brother, that he'll abduct Persephone, and it's an abduction because Demeter is Zeus and Demeter are the father and mother of Persephone, and Hades asked for one of his daughters, Zeus's daughters. Now you can do this stuff because they're gods. It's kind of difficult to do this as human beings. We don't want to be the gods. We just want to understand their forces and how they're operating in our life. Because if we can't identify what archetypal force is moving us, we will not be able to comprehend and give meaning to our life. It just becomes terrifying. So Hades is looked at, although not many people there's not a lot of statues or paintings to Hades. I think even the ancient Greeks just didn't want to activate. But usually it's depicted as a kind of a dark-bearded, regal god, he's definitely could take up the energy in the room, even though it would be invisible. And he's enthroned in the underworld, and he has a bird-tipped scepter. It's a bird, and he's considered also Plutonian, the god of the underworld. Some call him Hades, some call him Plutonian, and it's the giver of wealth. In the Plutonian image or aspect of him, he is the giver of wealth, and he kind of pours fertility like a cornucopia, like the horn of plenty. The Romans called him Pluto. So, Lord of the riches. So some see him as grim. So if you're dating or hanging out, or you yourself can have this sense of, wow, grim, but sternly just. Now, they say that he's irrevocable in his decrees, although he did revoke a few times the law of the underworld, particularly for Persephone, right? Because you're not supposed to leave the underworld, and she was going. And a few people have left the underworld. And so it's something where, for most, he's not going to change the law. But there is a flexibility there that if the law does not serve the wisdom of what is ready to happen, he'll bend a little bit. All right? So he was and is not evil in himself, and he's not an enemy, nor a tempter of evil. His realm is the unconscious, which is why many people are afraid to go into the unconscious. It's like, I'm not doing that. what's going to happen. It's a defeat. You see, when we go into the unconscious, it's a defeat to the ego or the Zeus or the person who's an extrovert, because it's an unseen presence. So in its human form, when he lives within, or is the predominant archetype that we are expressing in our humanity, it's like the human recluse. And he's unaware of what's happening in the world. And he doesn't have much of a persona, so he's kind of invisible. And sometimes he can be a person without position or wealth because he doesn't really care. He prefers the subjectivity and riches of the interior world. So he's kind of capable of doing nothing. But he's a tremendous source of creativity, and he's a good counselor. You know, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is Zeus and Hades. Introverted, when he's living in a human being, it can appear as if it's weak-willed. You know, because this world wants, particularly, America is an extroverted, thinking country. That's why we do all our shit right out there. And a Hades man is suspect. Although they make great anything that has to do with the mystery, anything that has to do with carrying out the law, the Hades person can do. So he doesn't really, he's introverted, and he doesn't get in an uproar. He's not screaming his politics in somebody's face. If he's going to make a difference, he's going to do it within, and he's going to, the depth of it, he's going to orientate himself in a different way. So to an extroverted world, he's weird. But he's not weird, he's just different. He doesn't make himself a victim. Sometimes it can feel like it's a little emotionally autistic. It's like, do you get this? And it's just, yeah, he gets it, but it doesn't really, the realm of the emotions, or he can feel like emotionally illiterate. But he's a dreamer. Fantasies and active imagination, these are descents that we make, and we can create with. That's how we begin to understand this archetype in our life. Now, Zeus and Poseidon are more capable of forcing women sexually and pursuing them. Hades didn't. He abducted her, obviously, but it's called the rape of Persephone, but in the older version of this myth, Persephone hears a cry. She hears the underworld. She hears the cry of the dead, and she wants to help them. So they have a common bond to protect and heal the invisible. Now, and that can mean people on the fringe of society are invisible and in somewhat hell or a world we don't know anything about. Now, if we want to get a sense of this Hades energy, if we look at the tarot, the Hermit is really a fabulous tarot card that gives you, that's very much the Hades archetype, because it's the Hermit is when questions are asked of us, or we ask them within ourselves, the nature of existence and the purpose of life. And it starts annoying us, and that's the call of the Hermit. Now, the Hermit is not a teacher. The Hermit is the one who goes in and starts discovering this. It takes the road less traveled. He can show you the way, but he's not going to sit down and say, now you got to do this, and you got to do that, and you better do your homework. None of that. The call of the Hermit is the call. And it can only be found inside. So if you have a deck of tarot, or you can get an image of it on Pinterest or something and just kind of walk around with that and really reflect on it. And we can use a lot of wisdom from the hermit right now, because we really do need to understand what are the dynamics that are affecting all of our lives. Because the pure extroversion isn't going to work it. We need some wisdom. So the hermit is the one who seeks answers alone. And it's only the whispers of his inner voice and the light of his lamp that guides him. So the light of our own lamp, a reflective light, a light that casts shadows. When we could see the shadow, we can get a greater idea. Oh. And of course it comes in shadow because there are things in life and within us that we cannot, they'll disappear in the bright light of day. We need a dim light, a reflective light, to see its shape and its unknown. Now, people who are afraid of depth, if a HADES moment comes into their life, they're a mess. Like, they just faint. But if we use the teachings of the hermit, or say, okay, this is the space I need to be in, or the attitude that I need to take in order to go into this unknown world, to get the wisdom, to get the gold or the alchemy of the inner world, this is how we do it. So it's when your own inner light must shine in the absence of the light of others for the true wisdom to emerge. And when we're in that HADES state of mind, or we're working with the hermit, we don't need others. We don't want others. We need to be alone. There needs to be no distractions. So any preoccupations with the world, and for true wisdom to emerge, there can be no distractions. So that's important to know. We need to go off or within without others. Now, when we have this, or we have a strong HADES, it's very difficult for extroverts to understand this. They can feel really rejected, or they don't know. It's like suddenly they were there and then they kind of disappeared, and what happened? And they don't love me, or they don't want me, or they just they're not helping me or complimenting me or relating to me. It's like, no, they've gone to get the gold. In a sense, that's when a man says he needs space, that's what it means. He needs space to explore. He needs distance. He needs to go it alone. Our famous myth and archetype of the cowboy, the lonesome cowboy. That's very HADES. It's HADES on a horse, right? So these are alive. These are eternal forces. So it's not, so that when the inner turmoil comes, that is the call for HADES. So we use the symbol of the hermit, and sometimes in some situations the tarot of the King of Pentacles. Now the King of Pentacles, which is the other thing about HADES, their word is their gold. Their word is their bond. It's not a person who's going to say, yeah, I'll help you, and then not be there. Absolutely not. They never buy the moment. Because so often people feel good in that moment to see themselves as loving and helpful and all of that, and then they completely forget about it because they don't have a strong HADES and it just sounded good, and then they forget. So when someone offers and they can't follow through, they don't have a strong HADES in them. It's not necessarily something to hurt, although it is hurtful. Don't say it if you're not going to do it, because you're feeling all puffed up and good about yourself, but you're setting it. It's a lie, and that when somebody has a strong HADES, they're accountable, but they'll also make you accountable. They'll say, hey, the next time you want to feel good, but not follow through, just don't practice on me. And people get very upset. No, well, this happened. No, you give your word. You want to be powerful in the world and in the inner world. Your word is your bond. Your yes is your yes, and your no is your no. And if for some reason that what you promised, even as an aside, it is your word. It's your authenticity. If you realize, well, I spoke too soon, then you get back on the phone or the text or your horse or whatever you're going to do, and you explain that. You're not giving an excuse. You just say, when I see the depth, I thought I would have time. I don't. And you set people free from your promise. And things do change, but in the real world, that's a very HADES aspect. Your word is your bond. This is a person you can do a handshake on, and it will be done, as agreed. No trickery. That's another thing. HADES doesn't have a strong trickster. As a matter of fact, I don't think the trickster would hang out with HADES, because they devour the trickster. The trickster is the archetype, the truth and the lie, and the truth. And the trickster tricks us into becoming conscious. That's its job, is to trick us. Oh, well, I thought this was going to happen, and something else happens. That's the trickster. But in this world of HADES, and in this case, in the hermit, as I said, it's not a teacher. He's not going to lecture. He's not going to say, come on, do your homework. He's not going to do any of that stuff. He's just going to talk through experience. He'll guide you, as the hermit does. And he may say how it may be found, but you better go find it. It's not going to baby you. Or nurture in the way of, come on, darling. You have such potential now. Come on. It's like, hey, if you want it, go here and go get it. And will always give us tasks. Now, if we just want to be the fair-haired boy or girl, HADES is not somebody we're going to like. What do I have to? I'm reading this darling book. Actually, it's 3 books. It's called The School of Good and Evil. And it's about, it's a kid's book, but for wise children, smart adults, I suppose. And so the evil, is the girl who thinks she's so good and so charming. I mean, really, she's a little mean girl. She winds up going to the school of evil, and of course, she's devastated because she thinks she's so good. And it's a wonderful play on an update on or new versions of fairy tales. So, although HADES is not a fairy tale, archetypes are not fairy tales. Fairy tales are the stories that influence and tell us about the archetypes. So we're going to continue with a little more HADES in terms of the archetype and what to look to within ourselves, and what the HADES man is about, and kind of their developmental years. And then the week after that, we will then do the Persephone HADES relationship archetypal. So that these are living; these live within us, and when we understand this, we can at least identify what is happening and get some gold. Which I want to give you gold. It's there for those who know what they're looking at. So and we definitely need a strong dose of HADES during this period of evolution, because it's just a little bit crazy, a little bit too much extroversion. where everything is being acted out and played out, and I just can't believe it. But meanwhile, it's like the walnut game with no P. It keeps on saying, okay, here it is, and we don't know what they're talking about. So, till next week, au revoir, bye-bye.